I'll just walk you very quickly through the key findings of the paper so you finally see what we're talking about, for those of you especially who haven't had the chance to read it. Stefan and I yesterday in the introduction gave you a little bit of a background why we decided to do this paper in the first place. In 2015 and 2016, practitioners from 6 countries got together to basically see how can we talk about the years of transition through personal experiences, through storytelling, because also as a theater place showed us last night, about things from an academic perspective it's different, but when you focus on the anecdotal examples and personal stories, then they give a little bit of a different story. And it's a one to which maybe one could relate a little bit easier. And then in 2017 we thought, well, it's time for us to do the academic underpinning, basically, of the small publication with it. And I encourage you to have a look at it afterwards. We have a few copies out there. And of course, as practitioners of civic education, we're interested in how can we put both the findings of the paper, but also of this collection of stories together, and how can we use that for civic education work. Now, the paper cannot escape cliches and generalization, simply because it's a 30-page document that focuses on more than 10 countries, and it looks at citizens that are born within a 20-year span. Many of you said yesterday that it's a great way to talk about transition and democratization through the lens of a generation. Our reasoning for that was basically that transitology, as many of you may know, is a very famous framework of analysis in the literature out there. Probably the literature of the 90s, maybe the early 2000s, was predominantly looking at the countries through the lens of transitology. But there was also the narrative that we have communism and that there is a clear path for us to democracy. So we had a point A where we start, and we had a point B where we end with democracy. Obviously, the generation is interesting, as many of you said that yesterday already, because that's the generation of our current leaders, but also the ones who are going to be leading both politics and civic life in the next decade or so to come. I think that even more important reason for us was because we wanted to look a little bit more into what political scientists call the political or the democratic political culture of citizens in post-communist Europe. We did notice that literature has been predominantly looking into institutions and elites, but there is less so focus based on actually what one of you said yesterday, you cannot have democracy without Democrats. So what happens with the culture of people? Now the generation, as we said many times, is the one defined in literature to be born between 75 and 95, and the benchmark is then 89, 91 because of the historical events. And this is the generation that was basically coming of age in the 90s. We did a quite extensive literature review, the entire generation of research, the youth studies that are out there, which were especially helpful for the second cohort, the one born between 85 and 95. The Friedrich Ebert Foundation has a lot of youth research. For those of you interested, Shell does youth research, TUI does youth research, not to mention the European Values Survey, which one could look at comparatively from the 90s all over till now. We did also a number of experts interviews and then 49 semi-structured interviews with representatives of the generation, and some of those representatives are also in the room. We were curious to see what are the values and the attitudes of those two cohorts, how transition has obviously impacted their ways of engaging, and then whether we could draw any lessons for practitioners of civic education. Now, when it comes to the key findings, we did see, as also some of you noted yesterday, that there are differences between East and West. Whereas the generation of transition is more focused on security and the economic well-being, the one in the West is more sort of having values like tolerance and solidarity higher on their values ladder. And again, I'm warning you, I'm just going to do a very quick walkthrough, and we can discuss some of that afterwards. There are also differences within the region, because again, it's a very large region when we're looking at. We did also interviews, I forgot to mention, with representatives of former Eastern Germany. So when you look at the whole geographical span from there to Russia, obviously there are differences in the experiences. But the differences come mainly from the fact that it was basically different processes happening in different countries. Whereas Yugoslavia fell apart, so the generation that did have experience of war over there, Bulgaria and Romania had a different story to tell. So again, findings differ also within the region. When it comes to the values, we found that like the top four maybe, and again, this is a unified picture of all the countries, are the generation cares about how they look like, they care about their dignity, they care about career in terms of how you climb up the social ladder, and they care a lot about earnings and money. Now, the question with money and earnings is a very interesting one, because it's not necessarily the one focused on consumption only, but it's basically a means to an end. So there is an understanding that money is what basically buys you influence in life. Then values like engagement, tolerance, altruism, but also innovation are actually basically from the fifth downwards. So they're less cared for. And this is also interesting to know, especially when it comes to times when we talk about the importance of entrepreneurship, but also giving back to society when it comes to trust or community building. There is a generally spread understanding that politics is really dirty business, and if the generation engages, then engagement in pragmatic causes is what is more appealing to them, I should say, to us. Trust is something we paid a little bit of more attention because it struck us that this is basically something that needs to be highlighted. This is a distrustful generation. There is trust when it comes to immediate members of family, parents may be colleagues, but then this is it basically. So there is very little trust when it comes to extended family, not to mention neighbors, people that have any forms or ways of being different, be ethnically, culturally, and so on. This does not come to a surprise, I guess, that the least trusted then in terms of institutions are parties, the parliaments, governments, and the media. And this is almost entirely across the region, with again small differences. We did find a quote when we were doing the research by an American political scientist who basically says that trust is the chicken soup of any society. So when people don't trust each other, what also research highlights is that they also tend to not trust democracy in their countries. We also noted that there is a difference between how the generation is being socialized when they come from urban centers versus when they come from rural areas. And we call the rest of the countries basically so-called civic deserts, because we noticed that there is very little civic infrastructure outside of the capitals. So if the generation wanted to engage, there would be more opportunities in the capitals. And we found a little bit of a narrative here when it comes to the way transition was approached in many of our countries, with a very strong focus on the center, but a little bit of a neglect when it comes to the periphery. So the lack of this civic infrastructure, basically outside of the capitals, could be also one of the ways to explain difficulty or structural impediment. We had a quote in one of the interviews that nostalgia for the past is a matter of geography. which basically points to the fact that people in smaller towns or in rural areas tend to be or are more prone to nostalgia for a past and tend to glorify. Then we also found out, especially through the interviews, that experience of democracy matters a lot when it comes to trusting democracy within the generation. This basically means that if beyond voting, if you haven't had your positive personal experience with democracy where you basically touch it in a way, so it stops being something abstract, you tend to trust democracy and its institutions more. But if you haven't made any positive experience with democracy, then obviously you don't tend to have a lot of trust in it. And we also found out that this also came out a little bit yesterday in the negative narratives of transition. I think the group which was supposed to work on the positive story of transition struggled a lot because across the region, transition has a very strong negative connotation, and even many colleagues would say yesterday, transition never ended. We also found out that the generation has little knowledge of institutions, so there is basically little knowledge of the instruments or the infrastructure of democracy and how one can make use of it. Then, I didn't mention this already in the beginning, these two cohorts within the generation differ from each other. The first one tends to be more active than the second one in terms of political and civic engagement. And one of the explanations could be really that there is a little bit of a memory of the times past, so communism pre-89 and 91. Whereas the younger generation, so the younger cohort, 85 to 95, is the one that is more focusing on the transactional causes, or those that are more pragmatic, where you do know that if you invest some effort in that, then there is going to be a payback from it. And then we did also see that because of the dispersion and maybe the inability to build communities, but also low levels of trust, there is quite a bit of an understanding of what one criticizes and does not want to have in civic and political life. But there is a challenge in basically coming together to formulate a vision for what one does want. So I think other political scientists in the room should correct me here, but I think this is a so-called negative sovereignty. So we know what we don't want, but we don't know. We cannot basically agree on the things we want to do together. Now, we did find it useful to think about the period of transition to democracy a little bit like as if citizens are integrating in a new society. It does take a lot of time, and it would be really naive to think about it differently. Maybe not so much as a takeaway for us, but for future countries that are going to be undergoing transition to democracy, to keep this in mind, that it's basically as if you're integrating in a new society. Political culture does matter a lot. So institutions are basically full of people, they're not structures and infrastructures, and if there is no focus on that, at some point you end up having people who don't necessarily find the power to bring or to get together this whole civic energy to protest. And someone mentioned Havel yesterday too, and we also love quoting Havel in our research. Havel had this essay in the early 90s when he said, listen, we need to make sure that people earn enough money so we empower them economically, but do not forget that culture matters too. And he talks a lot about civility as this being one of his key themes. And he said, if you start paying a nurse more money, the nurse is not going to start treating the patients better just because the nurse is earning more. Or if you give more money to the farmer is not going to treat the stock better just because of the money. So this is a matter of culture and not a matter of money necessarily only. Of course, the question for us as practitioners of civic education was, is there any role for civic education to work with and on generational transition among these topics? Obviously there is, but where to begin? We did distill some recommendations for civic education, and here we need to be careful because we end up talking very quickly about, okay, there was no civic education at schools when this generation was growing up, so we should introduce civic education in schools now, so the next ones are, better equipped and to be sort of better citizens. Excuse me. But non-formal civic education also has ways of working with adults. So we do think that there is a lot to be thought about and worked on in terms of adult civic education and how this could look like to basically find ways to engage a generation that is already in their 30s and 40s. When it comes to lessons learned and basically saying that civic education is important in schools for generations coming afterwards, there's a whole debate ongoing not only in this country but also in other countries, how civic education should look like, what it should entail, how should it deal with issues of nationalism and patriotism, and what is it actually that constitutes the so-called good citizen. I'm not going to go further into that. And I'm just going to say thank you very much for your attention. I hope you did find something useful in that, and I look forward to hearing back from you once you have time to look into the paper.